rule was enforced with a knife, not a voice. Just after morning count, a man was dragged from the cane line because he whispered the name while coughing. He didn't shout it. He didn't announce it. It slipped out of him the way breath does when the body forgets to ask permission. The overseer didn't strike him. He pressed the flat of the blade against the man's tongue and waited until the sound stopped on its own. No blood spilled. That mattered. Blood would have made it an event. This was procedure. By noon, everyone knew the rule without hearing it explained. No one was allowed to speak his name. Not once. Not ever. Not even by accident. No official record explains when the rule was written. The plantation ledger for that year is complete. Weather, yields, repairs, births, punishments, deaths, everything accounted for in careful ink, except the rule, except the name. What they never wrote down is that the rule didn't begin as a threat. It began as a correction, something the plantation had learned too late. After years of allowing the wrong sound to circulate freely. Before the rule, his name was common. It appeared in overheard conversations, in muttered complaints, in brief instructions passed between men who didn't want to be overheard by overseers. It wasn't a name spoken with affection or fear. It was spoken with familiarity, like a tool you don't think about until it's missing. He wasn't enslaved. He wasn't free. He wasn't counted. No official record explains how he arrived. He does not appear in purchase logs or transfer lists. His labor is never itemized. His food never deducted. And yet, the plantation reorganized itself around his presence. Behind the main boiling house stood a narrow structure, taller than it needed to be, narrower than made sense. It wasn't on the original plans. Older maps don't show it. Newer ones avoid drawing it clearly. It had no windows, no visible lock, and no smell of decay. That was the anomaly. Everything else rotted in time. Wood softened, iron rusted, stone cracked. That structure did not, and he was always seen entering or leaving it, never staying long, never sleeping there, but always returning. When machinery failed, someone fetched him. When yields dropped unexpectedly, he was consulted quietly. When sickness spread unevenly through the quarters, he was seen walking the perimeter at night. He spoke rarely. When he did, people listened, not because he commanded authority, but because afterward, things stabilized. No official record explains why. Those who knew never spoke again, because the plantation learned something dangerous, that the structure did not contain him. It responded to him. After years of observation, the owner noticed a pattern no one else was allowed to notice. When the name was spoken too often, things shifted, not dramatically. Subtly, tools broke more frequently. Workers collapsed without injury. Crops spoiled in storage without explanation. Horses refused to enter certain areas of the property. The name did not summon him. It strained the structure. What they never wrote down is that the rule was enacted only after the first breach. One night, during a storm, lightning struck close to the boiling house. Not directly, close enough to shake the ground. The structure vibrated. Boards flexed inward. For the first time, a sound came from inside. Not a voice. A count. Slow, measured, patient. The man whose name was spoken to freely stood in the yard, listening. He said nothing, but his posture changed. He didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. By morning, the rule existed. No explanation was given because explanation would have required saying the name again. Instead, the rule spread through consequence. People learned what happened when silence failed. Not immediately. Later, someone would speak the name in sleep. Weeks afterward, they would vanish. No punishment recorded. No burial marked. Just absence that never resolved. The structure remained sealed. Boards were added. Iron braces installed. Chains hung loosely across the entrance, never locked, as if restraint was symbolic rather than functional. At night, some claimed the structure breathed. No one confirmed it. What they never wrote down is that silence didn't weaken the anomaly. It preserved it. And every day the rule held, the count inside continued. Not because the name was spoken, but because it was remembered. The second enforcement came without witnesses. No one saw the mistake. No one heard the name spoken. There was no coughing fit, no dream murmur, no slip of the tongue. And yet, by morning, a woman who had lived on Plantation for more than 20 years was gone. Her cooking pot was still warm, her bed undisturbed, her shoes aligned neatly beneath it. No official record explains her absence. Her name remains in the census for that season. No mark beside it, no correction, no line drawn through. What they never wrote down is that her disappearance followed a pattern that had already begun to repeat. Whenever someone vanished without warning, the structure behind the boiling house changed slightly. Not enough for everyone to notice, enough for those who paid attention. A new mark appeared inside. No one was supposed to enter the structure after the rule. The door was sealed. The chains discouraged curiosity. But the overseer went in at night, alone, carrying a lantern he never used anywhere else. He counted, not the marks, the distance between them. The spacing mattered. When the rule was first enforced, the marks inside the structure were sparse. Tallies cut deep, but placed far apart, as if something inside had been waiting, patient, unhurried. After the woman vanished, the spacing tightened. What they never wrote down is that the overseer reported this to the owner only once. The owner listened without interruption, then asked a single question. "Is it accelerating?" The overseer nodded. The owner ordered the chains replaced with heavier ones, not to secure the door, but to make a sound if disturbed. After that, no one would near it willingly. The structure became a void around which daily life bent. Paths curved away. Conversations lowered. Children learned without instruction where not to play. The name faded from open use, but it did not disappear. It lingered in memory like pressure behind the eyes. People remembered the sound of it without allowing their mouths to shape it. They remembered how it felt to say it, not what it was. That was enough. What they never wrote down is that the rule failed most often in thought, not spoken aloud, not even whispered, but remembered too clearly. People who tried not to remember him suffered the most. Their sleep fractured. They woke with a sensation of having spoken loudly in a room full of listeners. Some began counting things compulsively, steps between buildings, the number of boards in a wall, the pauses between breaths. They were aligning themselves with something they could not see. The Plantation records show an unusual spike in self-inflicted injuries during this period. Fingers crushed in machinery, falls from ladders, burns from boiling sugar. No explanation offered, but the overseer noticed something else. Those injuries often coincided with nights when the structure produced sound, not speech. Repetition, a measured knock from within the walls. Once, then again, always the same interval. Never answered. What they never wrote down is that the man whose name could not be spoken stopped appearing in the yard. Not suddenly, gradually. First, he no longer came when fetched. Then, people stopped being sent to fetch him at all. Problems resolved themselves, or failed catastrophically without intervention. The plantation became less stable. The owner blamed weather, market fluctuations, labor discipline. He never blamed the structure, because he knew the truth he refused to say aloud. The rule was not protecting them from a man. It was protecting them from the structure finishing its work. The rupture did not arrive as violence. It arrived as success. One harvest exceeded expectations beyond reason. Cane grew thick and uniform. Sickness declined. Machinery ran flawlessly for weeks. The owner celebrated quietly. Inside the structure, the marks multiplied. The overseer counted them and realized something had changed. The tallies were no longer marking removals. They were marking permissions. What they never wrote down is that the count had reached a threshold. The night it did, the structure's door opened on its own. No chains fell. No boards broke. The door simply rested ajar, as if it had always been meant to. Inside, the air moved outward, not rushing, exhaling. And somewhere on the plantation, someone spoke the name again, not loudly, not deliberately. In relief, the next morning, the overseer resigned. He left without explanation, without wages owed, without taking belongings. He never spoke of the plantation again. Those who remained understood what had happened without being told. The rule was no longer enough, because the structure no longer needed silence to function. It had learned to count without it, and whatever was once contained was now being distributed, quietly, patiently, as if it had all the time it needed. The first thing to change was the sound of work, not the volume. The rhythm. Kane was cut at the same pace, but the pauses between strikes lengthened. Machinery ran smoothly, yet the moments of silence between cycles grew heavier, as if filled with something waiting to be acknowledged. No official record explains this shift. The ledgers for that season show unprecedented efficiency. Output climbed, waste dropped, injuries declined. On paper, the plantation had never been healthier, but the quarters felt wrong. People began waking at the same hour each night, not screaming, not gasping, simply awake, staring into the dark with the same thought pressing against their minds. Someone is counting. They didn't know what was being counted. They only knew the count continued whether they listened or not. What they never wrote down is that the structure no longer required maintenance. Before, boards had warped, iron had loosened. The overseer had made quiet repairs to keep the pressure contained. Now nothing shifted. The wood felt dense, almost stone-like. Nails refused to move when struck. A hammer blow rang dull, as if absorbed before impact. The structure had stabilized, and that terrified the owner. He ordered no one near it, not even to observe, especially not to listen. The chains were removed, not because they were unnecessary, because they had begun to vibrate on their own. The owner stopped sleeping in the main house. He moved to a smaller building farther from the boiling house, convincing himself it was temporary. At night, he heard the same rhythm everyone else did, not knocks, intervals, as if something was measuring time differently now. What they never wrote down is that the man whose name could not be spoken appeared once more, not in the yard, not near the structure. He was seen standing at the edge of the fields just before dawn, watching the canes sway in the morning air. He looked thinner, not weakened, condensed. Someone saw him and almost spoke. They stopped themselves. That was the last time anyone saw him clearly. After that, people began seeing each other differently. Faces seemed unfamiliar, even when known for years. Voices sounded slightly misaligned with the mouths they came from. Names, ordinary names, felt fragile, as if they could fracture under repetition. People avoided saying them too often. The rule had bled outward. What they never wrote down is that the structure began marking people without removing them. No one vanished for weeks. Instead, individuals became altered. A man who had once spoken freely began answering questions with exactness, never adding or subtracting a word. A woman stopped sleeping altogether. Claiming rest felt unnecessary. A child recited numbers endlessly without knowing where they came from. These people were not sick. They were precise. The owner noticed them and felt something close to relief. The plantation ran better when they were present. Tasks aligned themselves around them. Problems resolved before being acknowledged. It was working. That was the rupture. The realization that the rule had never been about safety. It had been about calibration. What they never wrote down is that the owner made a decision then. He ordered the structure open fully, not for inspection, for use. At night, selected individuals were brought near it, not inside, never inside, just close enough to feel the air shift. They returned changed, focused, silent, effective. The plantation entered its most productive period, and no one spoke the name, not because they feared the rule, because it no longer mattered. The anomaly had outgrown it. The structure was no longer containing something. It was processing it. People stopped disappearing. They stopped dreaming. They stopped questioning. What they never wrote down is that when the count reached its final phase, the structure stopped marking tallies altogether. There was nothing left to measure. The last sound it made was not a knock. It was a release, a soft, almost grateful sound like pressure equalizing. After that, the structure remained standing but empty, or so it appeared. The owner died soon after, peacefully. His will made no mention of the building. The land passed to heirs who inherited efficiency without understanding its source. Years later, long after plantation's end, people still avoided that patch of ground. They said it felt watched. They said time moved strangely there. They said certain names felt heavier when spoken nearby. No one could say why, because the rule had done its work too well. It erased the explanation, but not the effect. And if you feel a pause in your own thoughts now, a slight hesitation before remembering certain names, that is not coincidence. It is residue. The count never needed witnesses, only continuity, and it has never truly stopped. After the structure fell silent, people expected relief. They believed the worst had passed. That was a final misunderstanding. The nights grew quieter, but not calmer. The synchronized waking stopped, yet sleep felt thinner, as if rest was something the body performed without entering fully. Dreams flattened into sequences without emotion. People woke knowing something had happened, but unable to remember what. No official record explains why births declined sharply the following year. The numbers are there. The explanation is not. What they never wrote down is that the structure did not empty, it inverted. Where once it had drawn pressure inward, it now released it outward in increments too small to notice individually. The plantation did not feel watched anymore. It felt aligned. People began anticipating each other's movements without speaking. Work gangs reorganized themselves naturally. Tools were passed before being requested. Errors were corrected before being made. The owner's heirs praised discipline. They did not ask how it had been achieved. The structure was no longer opened, not sealed, just irrelevant, a relic that no longer needed guarding. That was when it began appearing elsewhere, not physically, functionally. In barns built decades later, walls would bear the same shallow marks, not identical, familiar, as if the hand that made them remembered the motion but not the purpose. In houses raised on former plantation land, residents noticed certain rooms where conversation slowed unconsciously, where names were avoided without reason, where arguments ended prematurely, not resolved, simply abandoned. What they never wrote down is that the anomaly was never bound to the building. The structure had been a focus, a lens, once calibrated. The process no longer required a single point. The count dispersed. A preacher passing through the region decades later remarked on the quiet. He said the people listened unusually well, that sermons ended early, not from boredom, but from completion, as if something had already finished listening before he began. He left unsettled. Those who knew never spoke again, not because there was nothing to say, because language had become inefficient. The rupture deepened with time. Names began slipping, not forgotten entirely, just delayed. People hesitated before addressing loved ones. Sometimes a name arrived late, sometimes not at all. Eye contact replaced speech. Gestures shortened exchanges. Children learned to recognize intention without instruction. What they never wrote down is that census takers complained. Too many identical answers, too many pauses, too little elaboration. One wrote in the margin, population compliant but indistinct. No follow-up occurred. The land was sold again, and again. Industry replaced agriculture. Rail lines cut through former fields. Factories rose where quarters once stood. The structure was dismantled eventually, taken apart piece by piece, sold as scrap or reused unknowingly. The wood splintered normally at last. The iron bent. People felt relief watching it go. They thought the anomaly was ending. They were wrong, because the last thing removed from the site was not the building. It was the habit. Silence had become procedural. People stopped asking questions not because they were afraid, but because the answers felt unnecessary. Decisions were made faster. Resistance thinned. Life smoothed into predictable motion. Efficient. What they never wrote down is that the final tally did not belong to the structure. It belonged to the people. Each unspoken name, each thought redirected, each memory softened to avoid friction. The count continued in them. Quietly, generations later, researchers tried to reconstruct the plantation's history. They found gaps, not missing documents, missing explanations. They found a rule referenced indirectly in letters. As agreed, as before. You know why. No one ever explained what why was. The researchers concluded superstition, local myth, exaggeration. They were satisfied. The anomaly prefers that, because it was never about fear. It was about function. And now, Long after the cane fields are gone, long after the structure was reduced to salvage, the rule remains active without being enforced. No one is allowed to speak his name, not because it will cause punishment, but because speaking would interrupt a system that has already decided how things should proceed. What they never wrote down is that some systems do not end. They only refine their methods. And if you have listened this long without hearing the name, without demanding it, then you have already complied. The count has included you, and it did not need you to speak. The realization arrived too late to change anything. Long after Plantation dissolved, after the land was parceled and repurposed, after memory itself became unreliable, patterns began emerging that no one wanted to connect. In nearby towns, certain meetings ended the same way every time. Not in agreement, not in conflict, simply ending. Conversations would trail off mid-sentence. Decisions would be made without discussion. Votes would pass unanimously without debate. No official record explains why dissent faded in that region faster than elsewhere. What they never wrote down is that people felt relief afterward. Less friction, less resistance, less noise. The silence felt earned. A school built on former plantation ground reported unusually high test scores. Teachers noted that students rarely asked questions but performed instructions flawlessly. Creativity was not absent. It was focused, narrowed, directed. Administrators praised discipline. No one asked what shaped it. The anomaly no longer announced itself through disappearance or fear. It manifested through compliance, so smooth it went unnoticed. That was its refinement. What they never wrote down is that the structure's final function had nothing to do with containment. It had been a tuning device. The rule was never meant to erase a man. It was meant to erase interruption. The name represented variance, the possibility of divergence, the reminder that something existed outside the plantation's intended order. Speaking it disrupted alignment, so the system adapted, first by punishing speech, then by making speech unnecessary, finally by making remembrance inefficient. The central rupture was not the opening of the structure. It was the moment people stopped missing what had been taken. Those who lived closest to the old grounds described an odd sensation. Not fear, not sadness, a dull reassurance. As if something heavy had been placed gently on the chest, making deep breaths unnecessary. Visitors felt it too, though they couldn't name it. They spoke more quietly, stayed shorter, left feeling oddly accomplished without knowing why. What they never wrote down is that the name still exists, not written, not spoken, but embedded in the pauses between thoughts, in the instinct to self-correct, in the discomfort that arises when silence is broken for too long. Attempts were made to document the anomaly. A historian collected oral histories, noticing consistent hesitations whenever conversations approach a certain absence. People describe a man without describing him, a role without a title, a function without agency. She transcribed the pauses faithfully. The published paper was rejected for being incomplete. She rewrote it, clarified, explained. The second version was accepted. She never remembered what she had removed. What they never wrote down is that the count does not measure time. It measures deviation. Each time someone almost speaks a name and stops themselves, the system tightens slightly. Each time a question dies before being asked, alignment increases. The anomaly no longer needs a building. It resides in habit, and habits survive better than structures. There is a reason no one ever recovered the name, not because it was hidden well, but because retrieving it would require sustained attention, contradiction, refusal to accept the first acceptable answer. And the system is designed to make that feel exhausting, unnecessary, disruptive. Those who knew never spoke again, not because they were silenced, because they could no longer remember why speaking mattered. If you feel a faint pressure now, a subtle inclination to move on, to let this end without resolution, that is not narrative design. That is the anomaly functioning as intended. Because the final stage is not disappearance. It is consent. And the most effective rule is the one no longer recognized as a rule at all. What they never wrote down is how the system reacts when alignment falters. Because it does. Rarely, quietly, almost politely. Every few decades, Something interrupts the smoothness. A person who lingers too long on a question. A child who repeats a word because it feels important. A visitor who notices the way conversation thins near certain ground and refuses to let it go. The anomaly does not rush to correct these people. It waits. That patience was learned on the plantation. In the archives of a regional newspaper, there's a brief notice from the early 20th century. 3 lines. No headline. No follow-up. Local man found wandering near abandoned industrial site. Unidentified. Refuses to give name. Appears calm. No official record explains why the site was never named. What they never wrote down is that the site stood exactly where the structure once had. The man did not resist help. He did not ask for it either. When questioned, he answered precisely what was asked and nothing more. When pressed for details, he paused, as if waiting for permission that never came. Doctors noted his pulse was unusually steady, his sleep patterns efficient, his responses free of hesitation. They called it shock. They were wrong. When asked his name, he opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Not refusal. Absence. He remained that way for weeks, then was released to an institution where records stopped abruptly. No transfer. No death notice. No discharge. Those who worked there later reported an odd change. Schedules tightened. Conversations shortened. Paperwork errors dropped to 0 for a time. Then things returned to normal. What they never wrote down is that the anomaly corrects without spectacle. It does not remove everyone who notices, only those who persist. The rule was never do not speak his name. That was only the surface instruction. The real rule was do not fixate. Do not circle the absence. Do not press against a gap. Do not try to recover what was removed, because attention is deviation, and deviation is what the count measures. By the time anyone realized this, it was no longer possible to step outside it. The plantation had been an experiment, not intentional, accidental, a convergence of silence, labor, repetition, and a single unrecorded figure who functioned as an interface between people and process. When the name was removed, the interface dissolved. The process remained. What they never wrote down is that the final tally was not reached on the plantation. It was reached later, in offices, in schools, in factories, in places where efficiency was praised and interruption discouraged. The anomaly spread best where people believed themselves free of it, because belief in freedom masks compliance. Those who knew never spoke again, not because they feared reprisal, because language itself began to feel optional. And when language becomes optional, names follow. The man at the center of the rule was not erased. He was generalized, distributed, no longer a person, a function. If you're still listening now, if something in you wants this conclude cleanly, to offer explanation, to resolve into meaning, that is the final retention signal. This is where most people leave, because resolution would require confronting what was exchanged for silence. And the anomaly does not punish departure. It counts it. What they never wrote down is that the system only fails when too many people insist on remembering at the same time. That has never happened, because remembering alone feels foolish, excessive, unnecessary, and so the count continues, not loudly, not violently, but with perfect efficiency, waiting for the next deviation, waiting for someone to almost say the name and stop themselves. What they never wrote down is how close the system came to naming itself. It happened quietly, without ceremony, without resistance. A municipal archive digitization project flagged an anomaly, not missing files, excess consistency. Decades of records from the same region showed an unusual lack of variance. Language stabilized faster there. Policy drafts passed with fewer revisions. Complaints resolved themselves before escalation. The analyst noticed a pattern and hesitated. That pause mattered. He reopened old plantation records as a control comparison, found the same gaps, the same indirect phrasing. As before, in keeping with the rule, no further clarification required. He circled the references, tried to reconstruct the logic. He never looked for the name. He looked for the reason. What they never wrote down is that the anomaly reacted faster than expected. The analyst's notes became shorter. his questions more precise. He stopped circling and began drawing straight lines. The pattern made sense now. Not morally, functionally. He closed the file satisfied. That night, he dreamed of a narrow structure with no door facing him. He walked past it repeatedly, knowing something important was inside, but feeling no urge to enter. The relief in the dream was profound. When he woke, he could not remember why he had cared. The project report concluded that the region showed early administrative maturity. No further study recommended. Those who knew never spoke again, not because they were silenced, because they were finished. The plantation is gone. The structure is gone. The man is gone in every way that can be measured, and yet the rule persists without being remembered. No one is allowed to speak his name, not because it would summon something, but because the act of naming would reintroduce friction, identity, interruption. What they never wrote down is that the system does not need belief, only repetition, only habit, only the quiet agreement to move forward without asking what was left behind. If you are watching this now and feel a subtle pull to let it end here, to accept the silence as sufficient, that is not fatigue, it is calibration. Because the most successful anomaly is the one that convinces you there is nothing left to uncover. The count does not require witnesses. It requires continuity. And it has already accounted for this moment, not as deviation, as confirmation. The name was never the danger. The absence was, and it remains perfectly intact. What they never wrote down is that endings were never part of design, only tapering, only the gradual removal of edges until nothing catches, nothing resists, nothing asks to be named. Long after the plantation vanished from maps, long after the structure was reduced to rumor, and then to nothing at all, the rule remained operational without being recalled, not enforced, not defended, simply present, like gravity. People who grew up on that land learned early how to pause before finishing a sentence, how to let a thought dissolve if it became uncomfortable, how to substitute clarity with progress. They called it maturity. They called it practicality. They never called it obedience. No official record explains why certain questions never gained traction there, why investigations stalled politely, why interviews ended cordially without answers, why anger cooled faster than elsewhere. What they never wrote down is that silence, once normalized, stops feeling like silence. It feels like peace. The final inversion is this. Nothing is guarding the name anymore. There is no structure, no ledger, no overseer listening for mistakes. The rule survives because no one wants to violate it, because saying the name would require stopping, and stopping would require asking what was traded for smoothness, for efficiency, for the relief of not having to think too long about anything that presses back. Those who knew never spoke again, not because they were punished, because speaking would have meant admitting that something had been taken without consent, and then willingly preserved. The plantation made a rule no one was allowed to speak his name, but the rule did not end with the plantation. It perfected itself. If there's a discomfort now, a faint irritation that nothing was resolved, that no revelation was given, that no name was finally spoken, hold that feeling. That is the only trace still available, because the system does not fear exposure. It fears interruption. And as long as you move on without demanding the name, without insisting on filling the absence, the count remains correct, quiet, balanced, unchallenged. The rule has been obeyed, and nothing else is required.